For more than 2000 years, much of Western thinking about beauty has revolved around a single powerful intuition. Beauty arises from harmony, proportion, and order. According to this view, something is beautiful when its parts fit together in a unified whole, when nothing feels out of place, and when form reveals a deeper coherence. This intuition first appears in ancient Greece and is developed in late Antiquity and then reinterpreted in the Renaissance, continues to influence architecture, design, and aesthetics today. Even people who have never studied philosophy still feel its influence. When someone says that a building is beautifully balanced, that a melody is harmonious, or that a face is well proportioned, they are using concepts that can be traced back to classical thought. The vocabulary of balance, symmetry, and proportion is part of our everyday language, but it has a long philosophical history. Already in Plato and Aristotle, beauty is associated with order, measure, and clarity. Plato speaks of a form of the beautiful in dialogues such as the Symposium and the Phaedrus, while Aristotle, in works like the Metaphysics and Parts of Animals, defines beauty in terms of order, symmetry, and definiteness. Their reflections stand on a foundation prepared by an even earlier movement, the Pythagoreans. The classical ideal is not only a chapter in the history of ideas, it is a way of understanding beauty that connects mathematical structure, sensory pleasure, metaphysical order, and human aspiration. It embodies the belief that the world possesses an intelligible form and that beauty is the visible sign of this form. To encounter beauty on this view is to glimpse the order of reality itself. In this lecture, we will follow this idea across three key moments. The Pythagoreans, who discovered a link between number and musical harmony; Plotinus, who gave classical beauty a spiritual and metaphysical depth; and Leon Battista Alberti, who revived and systematized classical proportion in Renaissance art theory. Along the way, we will also touch on sculptors and architects such as Polykleitos and the builders of the Parthenon, thinkers like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and later developments up to modern aesthetics. Taken together, these figures show how the idea of beauty as harmony has evolved and how it has shaped the Western imagination. The classical tradition begins with a remarkable discovery traditionally attributed to the followers of Pythagoras in the 6th century before Christ. According to later reports, the Pythagoreans noticed that musical consonances correspond to simple numerical ratios. When two strings differ in length by the ratio 2:1, the notes they produce form an octave. The ratio 3:2 produces a fifth, 4:3 produces a fourth, and so on. Our information about this discovery comes mainly from later authors such as Aristotle, Nicomachus, and Ptolemy. But the core idea is clear. Certain intervals that sound especially pleasing can be described by elegant numerical relations. Harmony, it seemed, was not merely a matter of taste. It could be expressed mathematically. From the discovery, the Pythagoreans drew a bold conclusion. Number is the fundamental principle of reality. Instead of seeing the world as a chaos of unrelated events, they saw it as structured according to numerical relations. The same mathematical patterns that govern musical harmony, they believed, also govern the motions of the stars and the organization of space. In this view, harmony is not subjective. It is the audible trace of an objective order that permeates the universe. When we hear a pleasing interval, our ears are responding to a real, measurable structure. Beauty, therefore, is not a mere illusion of the senses, it is a way in which the world's rational order becomes perceptible. This idea has enormous consequences. It links beauty with knowledge. To perceive beauty is to perceive order. To create beauty is to organize matter according to underlying relations. The thought that beauty reveals truth, that the beautiful and the intelligible are connected, has its roots in this Pythagorean vision and later influences Plato's theory of forms and Aristotle's analysis of nature. The Pythagoreans expressed their worldview in symbols as well as in doctrines. One of their central symbols was the tetractys, a triangular arrangement of 10 points, one in the first row, then 2, then 3, then 4. The sum of these rows is 10, which they treated as a complete and perfect number. The tetractys represented unity unfolding into multiplicity in an ordered way. It also encoded the ratios that generate musical consonances. For the Pythagoreans, this simple figure symbolized the structure of the cosmos, unity at the top, multiplicity below, all held together by number. From the standpoint of modern aesthetics, the tetractys may look like an obscure mystical diagram, but philosophically, it introduces an enduring thought. Beauty arises when we perceive a hidden structure that holds the many together in a unified pattern. The Pythagoreans did not limit harmony to music or astronomy. They extended it to human life. Just as a lyre must be tuned for its strings to sound well together, so the human soul must be ordered for a person to live well. Desires, emotions, and thoughts should be balanced. Extremes should be avoided. Inner conflict should be resolved into a higher unity. In this sense, ethical life becomes an aesthetic task, to shape one's character as a kind of inner harmony. This connection between beauty and virtue, between aesthetic order and moral order, will recur throughout the history of philosophy from Plato and Aristotle to medieval and early modern thinkers. Plato's Republic, for example, presents the just soul as one whose parts are in the right proportion, each doing its proper work in harmony with the whole. From the Pythagoreans, the idea of mathematical proportion spread across the Greek culture. It influenced sculpture, architecture, and philosophy. When we look at a classical statue or a Doric temple, we are seeing the embodiment of this mathematical ideal in stone. Greek sculptures did not simply imitate bodies as they found them. They sought an idealized human form. The sculptor Polycleitos, active in the 5th century before Christ, wrote a treatise known as the Canon, measure or rule, in which he argued that the beauty of the human figure depends on carefully determined proportions between the parts, the head, torso, limbs, and so on. The treatise itself has been lost, but ancient authors tell us that Polycleitos aimed to discover a system of ratios for the perfect body. His sculpture, Doryphoros, or spear-bearer, is often cited as the visual expression of his canon. The figure stands in a balanced posture, with weight shifted naturally onto one leg, the famous contrapposto. The limbs relate to one another in a coherent rhythm. No part appears isolated or out of scale. From a modern perspective, the Doryphoros is not realistic in the photographic sense. It is ideal. It shows not a particular individual, but what the Greeks considered a perfected human type. Proportion, here, is a way of making visible an ideal standard, a norm for the body that expresses balance, strength, and clarity. Aristotle's reflections confirm this general outlook. He remarks that beauty consists in order, symmetry, and definiteness, and adds that these qualities are found especially in the mathematical sciences. The sculpture's canon translates this philosophical insight into the proportions of a human body. Greek architecture developed a similarly rigorous concern with proportion. The Parthenon on the Athenian Acropolis, built in the 5th century before Christ, has been studied for centuries as a paradigm of classical harmony. Its columns, base, and entablature are related by specific ratios. Individual elements are adjusted to correct optical illusions and to create a sense of living symmetry. Scholars disagree about whether the golden ratio was consciously employed, and we should be careful not to project later mathematical obsessions back into antiquity. But there is wide agreement that classical architects used simple whole number ratios to create visual coherence. Even the slight curvature of the stylobate, the temple's base, and the subtle swelling of the columns, the antitheses, are deliberate refinements meant to produce a more harmonious appearance to the human eye. The Parthenon feels harmonious not because of decorative detail, but because of proportional relationships. Its beauty lies in the way measured parts form a unified whole. Why do proportionate structures tend to appear beautiful? In the classical tradition, the answer is both psychological and philosophical. Psychologically, a balanced structure is easier for the mind to grasp. The eye moves smoothly across it. Patterns can be recognized and remembered. The parts feel coordinated, and this coordination brings a sense of cognitive ease and satisfaction. Philosophically, proportion expresses unity in diversity. Many elements, columns, spaces, surfaces, are bound together by relations that are neither random nor chaotic. Beauty, on this view, is the perception of this ordered unity. It is not mere sensory pleasure. It is a pleasure in an intelligible form. This does not mean that all beauty must be perfectly symmetrical or rigidly regular. Greek art itself contains asymmetries and variations. However, within the classical paradigm, proportion remains the primary way of expressing the unity of parts within a whole. The next major development in the classical tradition comes in the 3rd century with Plotinus, the founder of what later commentators call Neoplatonism. Plotinus knew the works of Plato and Aristotle as well as the Hellenistic schools, and he gave the classical idea of beauty a new metaphysical depth. For Plotinus, beauty does not come primarily from the material substance of things, but from their form. Here, form does not mean outline or shape in a purely visual sense. It means the organizing principle that gives unity and structure to matter. A beautiful object is one in which this principle shines clearly and dominates the material. Plotinus develops these ideas especially in his treatise on beauty. When matter is disordered or chaotic, form is obscured, and the object appears ugly or shapeless. When form is present in a strong and pure way, beauty appears as a kind of radiance. The object seems to glow with unity. This idea allows Plotinus to explain why we sometimes feel that beautiful things point beyond themselves. When we see a particularly harmonious face, building, or landscape, we sense something more than the physical arrangement of parts. For Plotinus, this more is the presence of intelligible form which ultimately derives from a higher spiritual reality. In Plotinus' philosophy, the soul undertakes a kind of ascent through different levels of reality. At the lower level, it perceives physical beauty, the harmony of bodies, colors, and sounds. This perception awakens a desire to move beyond the merely sensory and to seek beauty in higher forms, in moral character, in intellectual order, and eventually in the divine source of all being, which he calls the One. This structure echoes Plato's famous ladder of love in the Symposium, where love for a beautiful body leads to love for all beautiful bodies, then to love for beautiful souls, laws, and knowledge, and finally to contemplation of beauty itself. Plotinus, however, emphasizes that beauty is not just a reminder of an absent world of forms. It is the actual presence of form in sensible things. When we are moved by beauty in this world, we are already in contact with a higher order. Thus, aesthetic experience becomes a spiritual event. The soul that learns to recognize beauty learns at the same time to recognize the traces of the intelligible world in the sensible world. Plotinus also recognizes that some powerful aesthetic experiences cannot be fully captured by the language of proportion and moderate harmony. He mentions overwhelming natural phenomena, vastness and intensity that affect the soul in a different way. Although he does not use the later term sublime, his descriptions anticipate what 18th century authors will later call sublime experiences, encounters with magnitude, power, or infinity that both attract and unsettle us. In this way, Plotinus deepens the classical ideal. Beauty is still linked to unity and order, but this unity can be sensed even in contexts that go beyond mere proportionality. Beauty becomes the presence of unity in multiplicity, a unity that may be calm and harmonious, but may be also powerful and awe-inspiring. Plotinus's thought did not remain isolated. His writings influenced late antique philosophers, early Christian theologians, and medieval thinkers. The classical idea of beauty as harmony and order was not abandoned. It was reinterpreted within new religious and intellectual frameworks. Augustine, one of the foundational thinkers of Latin Christianity, was deeply influenced by Platonism and Neoplatonism. For Augustine, God is the ultimate source of all beauty. Created things are beautiful when they participate in God's order, when they display unity, proportion, and the right arrangement of parts. In works such as De Vera Religione and the Confessions, Augustine often links beauty to unity and order. He speaks of well-ordered love, ordo amoris, and insists that creatures are beautiful when they occupy their proper place in the whole. In the Musica, he even analyzes rhythm and number as signs of a divine ordering mind. He does not focus on mathematical ratios in the manner of the Pythagoreans or Polyclitus, but he clearly preserves the classical connection between beauty, harmony, and intelligibility. In the Middle Ages, classical ideas about beauty were woven into Christian theology. Thinkers like Pseudo-Dionysius and the Areopagite emphasized the symbolism of light, seeing physical light and radiance as images of divine beauty. Thomas Aquinas later articulated a classic tripartite account. Beauty involves integritas, wholeness, consonantia, proportion or harmony, and claritas, radiance or clarity. All three reflect and adapt classical themes. Medieval architects, especially in Romanesque and Gothic styles, did not simply copy Greek temples. Yet they shared the conviction that sacred spaces should reflect a higher order. Cathedrals were often designed with careful attention to geometry, verticality, and the interplay of light and shadow. The proportions of nave and transept, the relationships between columns, arches, and vaults, and the patterns of windows and tracery were all meant to express a vision of cosmic and theological harmony. The key point is continuity. The classical idea that beauty manifests order and unity was not lost. It was transformed and integrated into a Christian worldview. With the Renaissance, classical proportion returns to the center of artistic practice and theory in a new way. Humanist scholars study ancient texts. Artists measure surviving ruins and sculptures. architects and theorists seek to recover the principles that guided Greek and Roman masters. A crucial intermediary here is the Roman architect Vitruvius, whose treatise De Architectura, on architecture, survives from antiquity and profoundly influenced Renaissance theory. Two figures are particularly important for our topic. Filippo Brunelleschi, who demonstrated classical principles through architecture, and Leon Battista Alberti, who translated them into theoretical language. Together, they exemplify the Renaissance conviction that beauty can be rediscovered by returning to classical models and by applying reason to artistic practice. Leon Battista Alberti was a humanist, architect, painter, and theorist. In his treatises De Pictura and De Re Aedificatoria, he systematically sets out principles of beauty rooted in classical ideas. Alberti defines beauty as a harmony of all parts in relation to one another, such that nothing could be added or taken away without impairing the whole. This sentence captures the classical insight in a precise formula. Beauty appears when a work is so well proportioned that any change would disturb its unity. For Alberti, this applies across domains to buildings, human bodies, faces, ornaments, and compositions in painting. Beauty is not a surface decoration that can be applied or removed. It is the coherence of the whole, the balanced relation of parts. In De Re Aedificatoria, Alberti recommends that architects use simple numerical ratios to organize their designs. He explicitly links architectural proportion to musical harmony, echoing the Pythagorean discovery. Just as certain intervals sound consonant because they embody simple ratios, so certain spatial relations appear harmonious because they embody similar relations in 3 dimensions. Brunelleschi's architecture, for example, in the Pazzi Chapel in Florence, illustrates this approach. Width, height, and depth are related in such a way that the space feels ordered and calm. The spectator may not be able to state the ratios, but they feel their effect as a sense of balance and intelligibility. In De Pictura, Alberti extends the same spirit to painting. He explains how artists can construct images using linear perspective, which itself is a mathematical method for projecting 3-dimensional space onto a 2-dimensional surface. Perspective creates a rational structure within which figures and objects can be placed in consistent relation. For Alberti, perspective and composition are not merely technical tricks. They are ways of creating a unified world within the picture. A well-composed painting guides the eye, balances masses and intervals, and ensures that every element contributes to the whole. Here again, beauty is linked to structure. Following both classical sources, such as Vitruvius, and contemporary anatomical studies, Alberti regards the human body as a key model for proportion. The relative sizes of head, torso, limbs, and features provide a natural standard. Renaissance artists, including Alberti's contemporaries, often used proportional schemes that trace back to classical sculpture. The body thus becomes a measure for both painting and architecture. Buildings and images that echo bodily proportions feel more natural and comprehensible. Once more, beauty is understood as the visible manifestation of an underlying order that connects human beings and their world. The Renaissance did not simply repeat ancient ideas. It also introduced new emphasis. While classical harmony provided the structure of framework, Renaissance humanism placed greater stress on expression, character, and emotion. In works by Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael, we often see a combination of rigorous composition and subtle feeling. Figures are arranged according to geometric schemes, triangles, circles, balanced diagonals, yet their faces and gestures convey tenderness, melancholy, joy, or contemplation. Here, beauty is both structural and expressive. Mathematical proportion organizes the scene. Human presence gives its life. The viewer experiences both the satisfaction of order and the richness of emotional meaning. The classical ideal of harmony is not abandoned, it is enriched. Leonardo da Vinci studied proportion with extraordinary care. His notebooks are full of measurements of bodies, faces, and natural forms. The famous drawing, often called the Vitruvian Man, shows a male figure inscribed within a circle and a square, illustrating Vitruvius's claim that the human body fits within these ideal geometric spaces and shapes. This image symbolizes a key Renaissance conviction. The human being is a microcosm, a small world reflecting the structure of the larger cosmos. Proportion is the link between the two. The beauty of the body, understood through measurement, becomes a key to understanding the beauty of the universe. For Leonardo, proportional analysis is never purely abstract. It serves both scientific curiosity and artistic practice. Beauty emerges where mathematical order and living nature coincide. Renaissance architecture embodies clarity, balance, and rhythm. In churches, places, and civic buildings by Alberti, Brunelleschi, and later Palladio, we see facades organized according to simple geometries, interior spaces laid out in comprehensible sequences, and decorative elements subordinated to the overall scheme. Standing in such a building, a visitor often feels that everything makes sense. Even without knowing the ratios or rules, they sense that nothing is arbitrary. The structure appears inevitable, as if it could not be otherwise. This feeling of intelligible necessity is central to the experience of classical beauty. Renaissance artists studied natural bodies, landscapes, and faces with unprecedented care, yet they did not simply copy what they saw. They selected, corrected, and organized. They aimed at an ideal within the real, a refined version of nature in which underlying patterns become explicit. This aspiration reflects the enduring influence of the classical ideal. Beauty is not merely what happens to be there, but what appears when form clarifies and elevates reality. The artist's task is to reveal this potential order. Given the distance between our world and that of ancient Greece or the Renaissance, we might ask why the classical ideal continues to matter. Modern and contemporary art often prize originality, disruption, and experiment. Yet harmony, proportion, and order still play an important role in how we experience beauty. There are several reasons for this persistence, many rooted in features of human perception and embodiment. Balanced structures are easier for the mind to process. When proportions are well organized, the eye can move through a work without confusion. Patterns can be grasped, and relationships can be understood. This cognitive ease feels satisfying. It produces a sense of calm and stability. We ourselves are proportional beings. Our sense of space, distance, and scale is shaped by the size and structure of our bodies. Spaces, objects, and images that respect these bodily measures tend to feel comfortable and right. Proportion resonates with our embodied way of being in the world. Many people associate order with intelligibility and intelligibility with meaning. A harmonious structure suggests that things fit together, that there is a logic to their arrangement. In a broad sense, classical beauty can symbolize the hope that the world is not meaningless chaos, but coherent whole. In a world marked by speed, noise, and constant stimulation, experiences of harmony and clarity can offer psychological rest. A well-proportioned building, a balanced piece of music, or a Syrian painting can create a space of contemplation. Classical beauty can function as a counterweight to fragmentation. These factors help explain why classical buildings still feel dignified, why balanced compositions remain pleasing, and why people often describe well-designed objects as elegant or graceful. The classical ideal endures because it speaks to deep patterns in how we perceive and inhabit the world. Modern aesthetics has introduced new concepts: expression, originality, the unconscious, the sublime. But the classical ideal has never entirely disappeared. It continues to influence both philosophical reflection and artistic practice. Immanuel Kant, whom we discussed in Lecture 2, does not simply repeat classical doctrines, but he gives them a new critical foundation. In the Critique of Judgment, he notes that certain objects, such as well-formed geometrical figures or organized natural structures, produce a distinctive pleasure because they display an internal order that our faculties can grasp without effort. Kant does not claim that all beauty reduces to symmetry or proportion. He is well aware that irregular and dynamic forms can also be beautiful. Nevertheless, he acknowledges that regularity, coherence, and proportion often support the free play of imagination and understanding. He also famously describes beauty in terms of purposiveness without purpose. We experience forms as if they were designed for our cognition without needing to claim that they serve any specific practical end. In this sense, he renews the classical insight that beauty is connected to intelligible form. In the 19th century, Romanticism challenged the classical emphasis on balance and restraint. Romantic artists and thinkers emphasized emotion, individuality, imagination, and the wildness of nature. They valued irregular forms, dramatic contrasts, and expressive intensity. Landscapes, ruins, storms, and inner turmoil became central themes. Yet even romantic works often rely on underlying structures. Symphonies by Beethoven, for example, can be stormy and turbulent, but they are built upon clear formal frameworks. The expressive power of the music is intensified, not weakened, by this structural coherence. Later in the 20th century, modernist architecture and design often revived classical clarity in a new key. Figures such as Le Corbusier advocated clean forms, functional purity, and simple proportions. Ornament was rejected, but proportional order remained. In this way, classical ideas about beauty as nothing superfluous, nothing missing, reappeared in a minimalist guise. Contemporary designers, whether in architecture, product design, graphic layout, or digital interfaces, frequently use proportional systems. The so-called golden ratio appears in logos, page layouts, and user interfaces, sometimes consciously, sometimes as an intuitive preference for certain relationships. More broadly, designers often rely on grids, modular scales, and balanced compositions. These practices are not mere superstition. They reflect an understanding that certain relations between sizes, spaces, and elements make information easier to see and environments easier to navigate. In this way, the classical concern with proportion continues to shape the everyday visual world. No influential ideal survives without criticism. From antiquity onward, many thinkers and artists have questioned whether beauty can be reduced to harmony and proportion alone. Even in early Greek thought, Heraclitus emphasized change, conflict, and becoming. From a Heraclean perspective, the world is not primarily a stable order, but a process of transformation. Later thinkers and artists, influenced by this outlook, have found beauty in dynamic tension, not only in Syrian balance. A stormy sea, a jagged mountain range, or a tormented face can be experienced as beautiful without conforming to classical proportional forms. Here, Beauty lies in energy, intensity, or truthfulness rather than in measured harmony. Artists from the Renaissance onwards sometimes resisted strict proportional canons in the name of expression. Michelangelo's later sculptures exaggerate musculature and distort bodily ratios to convey inner struggle. Baroque architecture and painting favor curves, diagonals, dramatic lighting, and theatrical effects. They often aim to move and overwhelm rather than to calm and stabilize. These developments show that aesthetic value cannot be entirely captured by symmetry and proportion. Beauty, it seems, also involves expression, movement, and sometimes excess. In the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche famously distinguished between Apollonian and Dionysian aspects of art in The Birth of Tragedy. The Apollonian represents clarity, form, measure, and individuation, qualities closely aligned with classical harmony. The Dionysian represents ecstasy, intoxication, rhythm, and the dissolution of boundaries. For Nietzsche, Greek tragedy at its height united both dimensions. He criticizes later culture for overvaluing the Apollonian at the expense of the Dionysian. Aesthetic life, he argues, requires both order and intensity, both structure and passion. This can be read as a critique of a one-sided classical ideal. Contemporary aesthetics often embraces complexity, fragmentation, and hybridity. Many modern and postmodern artworks deliberately disrupt classical expectations of unity and proportion. Collage, montage, dissonance, and asymmetry are used to question established forms and to reflect the fractured nature of modern experience. Yet even these works depend on some kind of organization. A dissonant composition still has structure. An apparently chaotic installation still guides movement and attention. The critique of classical harmony does not abolish the need for form. It expands the range of forms that can count as meaningful. To understand why the classical ideal has had such a long life, we must consider its philosophical implications. It is not only a recipe for pleasing designs, it expresses a view of reality and of human life. In the classical tradition, beauty is the visible presence of order. When we recognize proportion, we sense that many elements are bound together in a meaningful whole. For the Pythagoreans, numerical harmony revealed the architecture of the cosmos. For Plotinus, beauty manifested the presence of form, ultimately rooted in the divine. For Alberti, beauty emerged when rational design produced a coherent totality in which nothing was arbitrary. In all these cases, beauty points to a deeper intelligibility. It suggests that the world is not merely a collection of disconnected items, but a structured reality. The classical ideal also functions pedagogically. By training ourselves to perceive balance, coherence, and unity, we become more attentive to structure in general. We learn to notice how parts relate to wholes, how small changes affect the overall pattern, how order can emerge from complexity. This education of perception can support other forms of understanding. Whether in science, ethics, politics, or personal life, the ability to see patterns and proportions is valuable. Classical beauty, in this sense, is not only pleasing, it is formative. The association between aesthetic harmony and ethical harmony runs through classical thought. Plato, in the Republic, speaks of a just soul as one in which the parts are properly ordered under reason, much as a well-governed city is ordered under law. Aristotle often uses terms like moderation and mean to describe virtue, suggesting a balanced state between extremes. Later thinkers continue this analogy. A virtuous character is well-proportioned. Emotions, desires, and intellect are integrated. We still use aesthetic language in moral contexts, calling actions graceful or ugly, characters coarse or noble. The classical ideal suggests that to live well is, in a sense, to shape one's life as a beautiful whole. Finally, the classical beauty expresses aspiration. It points towards what could be, not only what is. A well-ordered building, city, or artwork suggests that human projects can achieve coherence. It hints that we might bring some order into the confusion of history and individual existence. This aspirational function explains why classical styles are often used in public architecture, parliaments, museums, courthouses. Such buildings are meant to symbolize stability, reason, and a certain dignity. Whether they always live up to these ideals is another question, but the symbolism is clear. In this lecture, we have traced the development of the classical tradition from its Pythagorean beginnings through Greek sculpture and architecture, Plotinian metaphysics and medieval theology, to Renaissance theory and modern thought. We have seen that the Pythagoreans discovered that musical harmony reflects simple numerical ratios. Classical sculptors and architects used proportion to embody an ideal of the human body and of built space. Plotinus gave classical beauty a spiritual and metaphysical depth by linking it to form and the ascent of the soul. Medieval thinkers such as Augustine and Aquinas adapted classical notions of unity and harmony to a theological context. Alberti and other Renaissance humanists revived and systematized classical proportion in painting and architecture. Modern philosophers and artists reinterpret classical principles, sometimes challenging them, sometimes returning to them in new forms. Critics of harmony, from Romanticism to Nietzsche and contemporary art, expanded the range of what can count as aesthetically meaningful without eliminating the importance of order. The classical ideal remains powerful because it articulates something fundamental about human perception and desire. Harmony calms and clarifies. Proportion creates intelligibility. Order suggests that the world, at least in part, makes sense. Even in an age of fragmentation and experiment, we continue to respond to these qualities. In the next lecture, we will turn to the sublime and ask how awe, fear, vastness, and the thought of the infinite open a different but closely related dimension of aesthetic experience. Where classical beauty speaks of measure and form, the sublime will confront us with what exceeds measure, and in doing so, will deepen our understanding of both art and ourselves.